And a very good morning to you. It is time for PRBites once again, where I read out the newsletter that you can get if you want to get the written version of this rather than listening to me rambling away by going to the publicrelationspodcast.com and simply click on the newsletter button. It is that easy. Head to the publicrelationspodcast.com, click on the newsletter button, and you can get the written version of this so you can skim through the bits that you're most focused in on. But if you are on the train or in the car or whatever at the moment, then I've got a couple of minutes to ramble on about a few things, actually. A couple of topics then that I highlighted in today's newsletter. First of all, are PR people really needed anymore? Why you should treat social media platforms' own advice with suspicion, and why branded podcasts could be a thing of the past. As usual, I'm going to try and bring you a bunch of ideas in this, all about PR techniques and comms techniques that I am seeing going on from around the comms world. And some of the things that I'm spotting also, it's interesting. It's a bit like when I was a news editor, right? Is that you always used to find the main story about 2/3 of the way down in an article. And I read a lot of articles all the time around the comms world. And so often you find these little nuances I'm about to cover about 2/3 of the way down or in the last paragraph. Anyway, let me get on with it. First of all, with the I Spotted section, there's a couple of stories in here, first of all. Should you trust social media advice on content strategy? Well, an article on social media today has raised an interesting point about Instagram's new best practice tips. According to Instagram's recommendations, creators should aim to post at least 10 reels monthly. However, the author says that while this advice might benefit Instagram, which thrives on an influx of varied content, it may not be the best strategy for you. That's what they're saying. The key question here is who does this advice really serve? Is it designed to optimize your PR campaign success or Instagram's business model? No offense against Instagram for wanting to do this, but the author argued that a single high-quality reel is likely to outperform a whole series of more hastily produced ones. So in other words, while platforms' advice may be an interesting starting point, it's what is working in your campaign with your topic and your message that is always going to be more important to follow. The second of the three stories in the I Spotted section, this was about lessons from Victoria's Secret revamp. And Victoria's Secret have been chatting with the Drum newsletter. And I think 2 points really stood out for me as being useful for PR and comms folk. First one was localized language matters. By tailoring their messaging to specific markets, they saw a notable lift in sales. It wasn't massive, but it was something. So in this particular case, in the UK, people refer to underwear differently than in America, and simply by changing words, saw a lift for them. The second point was that AI content works and it doesn't. They experimented with AI-generated marketing, which I know a lot of you folks are too. And at first, they saw some good results, but then it dropped. And they conclude that people liked the novelty, but ultimately wanted human content. As I said, they've returned to putting influencers in hot air balloons because people wanted to see real human content. I'd love to know what you are finding, though. Are people reacting to your AI content or seeing it as a novelty and reverting to a desire for human content? It's still early days, isn't it? But I'd love to know what you are finding. And finally, the third story in the I Spotted section was this one about whether we really even need PR and storytelling. Well, at a recent business idea pitching competition, so this is one of these where, I think I've mentioned this in the podcast before, some people come along, they pitch their ideas, and you have the judges who sort of say which ones are going to be good. Well, a judge said one of the entrants, that the story around their product doesn't really matter. Do we need PR people at all, then, is kind of the question. Now, I get part of the point that the product has to be good. You cannot sell a bad product. Well, actually, I think we've all bought bad products. But it suffers, doesn't it? Ultimately, it is harder to sell a bad product than it is to sell a good one. And their logic was that the product is all that matters, although there's always going to be faults with products. But how do you stand out in a world where most products exist already? There's so much noise. I mean, how many actual, really, genuinely, really innovative products exist today? They don't. Most things are iterations on something else, or they're similar. So how do you stand out? You stand out with a story, right? You think about the classic examples of like the Dollar Shave Club. Their razor blades weren't groundbreaking. They were razor blades, but they used a clever viral video and a narrative about a small, scrappy company to rocket to the top. It wasn't the product that made them a household name. It was the story. Now, at this particular business event, we were talking about chocolate. And how much of that is there out there? Like I say, I think I've talked about this before on the podcast, but there is tons, isn't there? So claiming your chocolate is good is not enough. Everyone claims that chocolate is good. People need to buy into the idea, the story. The particular case that I was talking about with this person was that they were talking about the health benefits of drinking chocolate in the morning over coffee. Apparently, it doesn't give you the same sort of jitters that coffee does. So, yes, I agree with that judge. The product is essential, but I disagree completely in the fact that the story isn't essential as well. But, I know I don't need to convince you. I'm preaching to converted with this one. It just struck me, though, that they said this, that, no, story doesn't matter. It's the product that matters. I couldn't disagree more. Right, moving on to the next section. It is happening now, and this is an interesting one. Branded podcasts, are they dead? Well, maybe. Now, if you think podcasts, we don't do them, just keep listening to this, because it's an interesting blend of AI, this story. Podcasts as a way of reaching people with your branding could be on the way out. Now, Google is experimenting with a tool called Notebook LM, and the idea is that you paste in your content, any content, and one of its features is to turn it into a conversational podcast with two hosts. I am not kidding. When you listen to what it generates, it is pretty amazing. In my particular case, there was an AI man and a woman discussing what I pasted in as if it was a real casual chat show podcast about the topic. So what about the pros and cons of this? How can you use this as a comms person? Firstly, I think the voices are scarily good. It sounds like, in fact, what I'll do, I'll play a clip in just a second. I'll mix in a clip of what it generated. It sounds like two normal people having a natural conversation about the topic that I had just pasted in. So if you want to create a quick and simple podcast about your latest announcement done in a conversational way, you could, in theory, automate the entire thing in just a few minutes without any voiceover artists, and it could be made from any announcement, document, blog post, or whatever else. You're also going to want to check the terms and conditions. I haven't read them because this is still experimental from Google, but the potential is just obvious. The downside, and I think this is the usual one with AI, is that it struggles with nuance. It gravitates back to generalities or widely accepted norms instead of diving into the specific insights that you are trying to convey. So let me give you an example here. I pasted in a transcript from the conversation I had about the value of using public relations for sales teams. Now, the main concept was about providing them with air cover. I talked about it in previous episodes. Now, it got this at the start of this episode it created. I'll play this to you in just a second, as I say. But then it quickly went into a conversation about setting up websites or building a brand generally, which wasn't the focus of the content I pasted into it at all. Now, this is quite a downside because, as we know, in today's noisy market, offering something unique and insightful is crucial if you want to stand out. So I am curious to see how it evolves. If we can tell it what it got wrong and get it to focus on the right thing, then it could well work. But as I know from my own experience of even using AI with the content I create, it can be really hard to get AI to focus on insightful content as it always gravitates back to these generalities. So for now, though, it is quite impressive for trying. For example, for trying, like, say, turning a dry company announcement into a conversational podcast that's easier to digest. And if the people that you're working with are not natural communicators, this could be a way of saying, look, we don't need voiceover artists, we don't need to create a podcast, we could actually just generate this in a conversational way. So you might be able to get these people on board with that. I can see how brands and organizations might start using this. I think there's some pretty big potential in there. But as I say, the challenge will always be with the insight, that extra added element. If you try it or use this or use it in the future as it sort of develops a bit more, I would love to know what you come up with as well. In the newsletter, I've actually put a link where you can find more details about how to use this and how to experiment with it. But let me just play a quick clip. It is scary, this, of the podcast. So remember, I pasted in the transcript of the discussion I had about that, about air cover and sales teams. Just listen to this.
And she uses this really interesting term.
Okay.
Air cover.
Air cover. Okay. Oh, unpack that for us.
So it's a military term, right?
Right.
Think of fighter jets protecting ground troops so they can advance.
Okay.
Lucente's argument is that PR marketing your online presence, it's all air cover for your sales team.
So instead of leading with like a company story, the salespeople are stuck explaining what the company even does.
Exactly. They're trying to win a battle without any support.
Okay, next section is tip from a guest, and this is case study advice. If you are using a customer or client as a case study, it's not enough to focus solely on positive outcomes they've experienced with your product or service. To make a real impact, you need to structure their story as a narrative. Instead of jumping straight to the results, set the stage, where they were before they found you, what challenges or frustrations they were grappling with. Then introduce your solution and highlight the pivotal moment where things began to change. Only after that should you bring in the transformative impact of how your product made a difference and where they are today. And by taking this narrative approach, this was advice I was getting from the episode I did, you're not just presenting a happy ending, you're taking your audience on a journey. And journeys, as we know, with their ups and downs, resonate far more deeply than a straightforward endorsement ever can. Right, final part of the podcast. As I say, if you want to read this or get the links to these different articles, I put all the links within the newsletter, the printed newsletter. Just go to the publicrelationspodcast.com, and click on the newsletter button, and you can get the print or the written version of this with the links in too. So finally, our PR puzzle. We will round off with this, a scenario, a fictional scenario, just have a bit of fun with to see how you would tackle this. What would you do in this particular situation? So the scenario is this. You've been brought in to manage the PR campaign for a national telecommunications brand. And the media is heavily criticizing the brand for its poor customer support, leading to a public perception that the company is dismissive and unhelpful. Gosh, I think we've all experienced this. And in fact, let me name and shame them. Telstra in Australia, who have currently removed my internet and it's not working, and I'm having to use my mobile phone to upload this today. So this is not an uncommon story, unfortunately. But anyway, let's get back to the scenario. The firm is getting a huge beating in the press, and they don't seem to be letting up. The firm wants you to tackle this for them and instill the message in people that we are listening and making things right. And your research shows customers see you as a faceless entity that cares more about profit than people. So you need to overcome this. As usual, you could do many things, but you have just two options in our scenario. Which are you going to pick? Option one, launch a campaign called We Hear You, where top executives, including the CEO, spend a day a week over a month taking customer service calls themselves, with social media updates showing them tackling real customer issues and showing lists of tangible things they want to improve in social media updates. Or option two, do you create a listening van tour across major cities where pop-up points are set up for customers to speak face-to-face with brand representatives, share their experiences, and receive immediate resolutions, creating video stories of transformed complaints for social media into positive experiences. So do you have the top executives going into customer service, or do you have the listening van tour? What would you do? This is what I would do. This is my opinion. I'd love to know what you think, though. Remember, we're always stuck with just two options here. So let's say we've got just these. I think the problem with option two, the listening van tour, is that it would just turn into a shouting match. You know, you're going to end up with a lot of people coming along just to scream and shout. And if you have the media there watching, it's only going to reinforce that negative narrative. So I think number two for me is out immediately. I would go for option one. What I like about it is it's fast organised. As we've discussed, the press is all over this right now, so we need to react fast. And by having top executives take customer service calls, you're showing real action. You know, you don't need a live video or to highlight who's on the call, just showing that they're there taking these calls, even if they introduce themselves with a fake name. The focus here should be on demonstrating that they're genuinely listening, and it does that straight away. You can capture them noting down issues or even summarizing their key takeaways at the end of the day in order to show they're actively trying to understand and improve things. It's immediate, it's fast, organized, etc., etc. You know, I think the main pushback is probably going to be, well, frankly, the same with the van idea, and that is that this is a PR stunt. But that's why I think it needs to run over a period, maybe a day, a month at the minimum. So not just a one-off thing, which could be said as a stunt. But if they're doing it over a month, then you can maximize it. I mean, you can even draw out angles of things that are already in action. They're coming back in the third week and they're finding people are already finding things better, stuff like this. So option one is by far my preference. It's media friendly, it's direct, it's visual, and I think it sends a strong message that we're not just listening, but we're committed to making real change. But what would you do? What would be your approach to that problem? That is it for today. As usual, if you know anyone who'd like to get the newsletter, send them as well to the publicrelationspodcast.com. Click on the newsletter button on there. As I say, in the printed version of it, you will also get all those links in it too. I should say, my apologies today if you're finding a bunch of typos in the newsletter. I've tried to catch them all, but as I say, I haven't even got access to spell checkers today because of my lack of internet, which is rather frustrating. Hopefully they will return that back, but I know it's not going to be before the end of the week. So, gosh, it's funny, isn't it, how reliant we go on the internet now. Anyway, that's it for now. Have an awesome rest of your day. I will speak to you later in the week. Fingers crossed, if the mobile phone company let me. Bye.